So chapter 3 is more about functions and their graphs, and section 3.2 we're going to start talking about the graph of a function. So we need to be able to identify the graph of a function and obtain information about the graph of a function. So remember, keep reminding yourself that graph means the same thing as picture. So if we're talking about graphically, it means looking at the picture. Or if it says make a graph, we're making a picture of an equation. So first we're going to identify the graph of a function, because every graph is not the graph of a function. So our theorem is called the vertical line test. And it says a set of points in the xy plane is the graph of a function if and only if every vertical line intersects the graph in at most one point. So the way our language works, we could also say this theorem another way. We could say if no vertical line intersects the graph at more than one point, then it's the graph of a function. So really you're just imagining making vertical lines everywhere on the function, and if you only ever hit the graph once, it's a function. So here's a graph of an equation. Every vertical line hits the graph only once, so this is a function. How about this one? No, I hit the graph twice in lots of places, and no for this one. So it's easy to see visually. So objective 2 is going to be obtaining information. So obtain information from the graph of a function. There's a lot of information there, and we need to know how to pull it off of the graph. Okay, so we're going to use this graph to answer all these questions, A through N. So the first one says find f of 0. So that says when x equals 0, what is y? So in this case, when x equals 0, y equals 0. So f of 0 equals 0. Okay, and then f of 6 says when x equals 6, what is y? And again, y equals 0, so f of 6 is also 0. Okay, so then we need to find f of 2. So when x equals 2, what is y? So when x equals 2, we come down to the point on the graph, and we see y equals negative 2, so f of 2 equals negative 2. And notice this corresponds to the point 2 comma negative 2 on the graph. The number inside the parentheses is the x coordinate. So f of negative 2 says come over here to x is negative 2 and go to the point on the graph, and f of negative 2 equals 1. So this is B, A. So C asks us, is f of 3 positive or negative? So here's x is 3, and we don't know what number this y value is, but we can see that it's negative because it's below the axis. And then how about f of negative 1? When x is negative 1, here's the point on the graph, and we don't know exactly what the value is, but we can see that it's positive. Then E is thinking differently of for what values of x is f of x equal to 0? So it's saying when is y equal to 0? So you go along the y-axis the x-axis where this is the line, y equals 0, right? We say, oh, it happens here. It happens when x equals 0. It happens when x equals 4. And when x equals 6. So those are the values of x for which f of x equals 0. Then the f part says for what values of x is f of x less than 0? So when is y negative? So that's this part of the graph down here. and y is negative on this piece of the graph. So y starts being negative as soon as x is greater than 0, and it stops being negative when x gets to 4. So you can either write it as this inequality for the values of x between 0 and 4, or you can write it as interval notation, but this is not the point 0, 4. This is the interval on the x number line from x is 0 to x is 4. Okay, and then let's do G and on in class together. And this next one doesn't have a picture that goes with it. We just have an equation. So we need to find some information using the equation. So first asks, is the point -1, 2 on the graph of x? So this is asking the question, is f of -1 equal to 2? So we say, well, what is f of -1? And it looks like it's -1 minus 5. So no, the point -1, 2 is not on the graph. The point -1, -6 is on the graph. And B says if x is -2, what's f of x? So f of -2, oops, I see I lost a 3 here. Doesn't change my answer, but it changes the point that's actually on the graph. So if I have -3 times -2 squared plus 5 times -2, I have -12 minus 10, or -22. So f of -2 equals -22. So the point on the graph is -2, -22. So now the question asked is different. It says if f of x is -2, what is x? So if y equals -2, we put -2 in place of the y, or the f of x. So remember, f of x and y are interchangeable. So we're solving this equation. We're saying when y is -2, let me put -2 in its place and solve this equation. So let me put the 3x squared over on this other side so it's positive. And it looks like we can probably factor this, I'm hoping. So that looks like 3x squared minus 5x minus 2 is 0. So either 3x plus 1 equals 0, or x minus 2 equals 0, and x equals -1/3, or 2. So there are two places on the graph where f of x is -2. It's -1/3 and 2. So let's do the rest of these together. And I want to look at some of these pictures. So this picture has the red graph is y equals f of x, and the blue graph is y equals g of x. So we're supposed to first find f plus g of 2. Well, we remember from the previous section that that's f of 2 plus g of 2. So it says we come over here where x is 2, and we say f of 2 is 2 plus g of 2 is 1. So that would be 3. And then b is f plus g of 4. So that's f of 4 plus g of 4. So f of 4 is the red graph, so that's 1. G of 4 is the blue graph, so that's -3. So f of 4 plus g of 4 would be -2. And I think you can figure out the rest, but we'll talk about them in class. And that's the end of that section.